Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure Heaven is a Place on Faerun, part of the Truly, Madly, Deeply series. This is the third module or third part of the series, designed by Chad Cray and Patrick Higingbotham of NZS Games for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, and Pretty Boy and Yuma. Thank you all for your support. Switch on over to me. So it's always tricky in D&D to balance, to make content for D&D as a pre-written adventure or something, because you have to balance giving the DM a lot of information and making sure everybody follows the story, but at the same time, everyone is creating the story as you play. So how do you do that? And there's not really a good answer for that other than you try to create a balance. You want to create enough of a framework there to make it fun for everybody to play it, while also make sure you have actual enough there, because otherwise what are you selling other than just a bunch of ideas, which I guess is kind of what a lot of DM's Guild stuff is. This one is a little too railroady. It's excessively linear in what it wants the players to do very specifically. And unfortunately, on the flip side of that, the story isn't good enough for that. Like, if you're going to railroad your players, which by railroad, it's a pretty common term in tabletop RPGs, but that means your players are on a specific path that they're not supposed to veer from. So they're supposed to make either specific decisions or have those decisions made for them in order to get to the next story beat. And you can do that in places, and even the best adventures do that in certain places, if the story is good enough. If it's not, then everybody needs to come up with their own little branching paths to figure out what to do, and you just kind of end up like, okay, well, once enough of these things has happened, then they get to the next part, rather than making this straight line. And this one kind of suffers from both of those problems. It is an adventure. It is designed for 3rd level. I believe it's 3rd level, optimized for PCs, for 4 PCs of 3rd level. And this is, I should preface, part 3 of this series called Truly, Madly, Deeply, which, by the way, on the DM's Guild, it literally pops up as Truly, Madly, Deeply Module 3. Just as a point of advice for DM's Guild creators, don't do that. If you want to create a series of modules, then you need to put, I think you need to put the title of the module first, and then you can do dash whatever part 3, or something. This one literally is like, if I search Heaven is a Place on Faerun, it does point to this, but it's not in the actual title listing for the module on the DM's Guild. So that's already makes it confusing for me to even tell people, like, what is this module, and I imagine that's got to be painful to try to like advertise or market it as well. So just kind of a point of advice, if you want to make your modules a part of a series, then put that like afterwards in parentheses, or some kind of designation to make it where that's not the main. Don't just say this is module 1, this is module 2, module. For example, the Minotaur Trilogy series by PV Publishing has Minotaur's Betrayal dash the Minotaur Trilogy Part 1 or whatever it is. So that's more easily to digest and understand. Like, okay, this is part of a series, but there's also its own thing. This one, it does include. This one really does feel like it is part of a series, and it starts off even with the prologue, and it says essentially, if your players aren't running this series, then just ignore the prologue. Well, okay, it just says, look, just get the players, like they need it. It doesn't feel like it drops in well enough, and that's fine. Not necessarily every DM's Guild thing has to do it, but you also have to presume that a lot of people that are going to the DM's Guild are looking to supplement their own stuff that they're working on. So being able to drop your stuff in, at least having those options to be able to drop in, so come up with some kind of generic adventure hooks helps. And this one is just like, either you run this as part of the story or you don't, and good luck trying to figure that out. But the conceit here is that the players are Harpers. They are actively members of the Harpers. They are all good, aligned, and not fuck ups or criminals, or don't steal from people or any of that. So that's definitely a caveat. They're working for an already named NPC, and they are sent on their next mission, which is just kind of generic. It's just there's this mining town called Heaven, which the irony there is it's not heaven at all. And there's disturbances of like swarms of insects and just insect-related problems, and the PCs are just sent to go there on assignment. And then what follows are 3 parts. Part 1 is not great. I don't want to be overly mean or cruel. That's not my shtick. And in fact, I'm generally very positive when it comes to the things I review. I try to always find the good parts. I really didn't like Part 1 particularly. This is a case where it is excessively linear, and it also almost assumes that the players are idiots, which is not cool. Maybe it's supposed to be obvious to me at least, but the players meet with their guide, who's a man named Wolf, a very hairy man named Wolf. So obviously that's sending off some red flags, or at least should. And on the road to this town, which part 1 is literally just them getting to this town that they're supposed to get to. They meet up with these halfling family of cattle farmers. One thing I do like about this adventure, that is a really standout, awesome part, is the dramatis personae has insanely good notes on every single NPC in this adventure, and there are quite a few NPCs, and it just very, very well done. Everybody's got their own little quirks and mannerisms, even just little short ones that like are children and all this stuff. It's just that part's really good, and there's a whole like halfling family with guards and everything that the players are supposed to meet up with. And then every day they essentially wake up and like strange things are happening. People are seeing like eyes at night, and the cattle are being scared and all this. The bizarre thing is each check is only made the next morning as the players investigate. Why the hell would the players not be doing things at night? Like, it just assumes the players are just going to shrug their shoulders and be like, oh, well, I guess we'll go to sleep tonight, or just, investigate the next morning. There's no notes on if the players decide to, have guards shifted at night, or set traps, or just do whatever or just stay up one night. Like, there's none of that. So that would instantly break this whole narrative chain if the players, deigned to do any of that, which any players would. Instead, it just follows, like, what they can do the morning after, and essentially you figure out pretty quickly that, yes, your guide wolf is, in fact, a lycanthrope, although, because it's a 3rd level adventure, and you really can't use like an actual werewolf, because as I discovered recently in our Tomb of Annihilation campaign, werewolves are immune to non-magical weapons, so you really got to be careful about using them with low-level parties. And in this case, the adventurer seems to realize that, and instead uses this stat block for a jackal were, which oddly has this powerful ability of a sleep gaze, which can just knock people unconscious by looking at them, which is kind of crazy. But otherwise, the players are just supposed to realize this. There is a night encounter. We do get a nice battle map here, which, kudos for the adventure for including battle maps. I'm always a big stickler on battle maps. That's a huge part of, obviously, running things on Roll20. I will say, you can denote here by the fact that it says Goblin Camp on here. These look like they are just maps that were picked from the designers to be used in this adventure, and they do feel excessively generic, which is another problem I'll get to when we get to the dungeon in Part 3, but I guess, there is a thumbs up for at least having maps there, even if they're not actually tied specifically to this adventure. The Jackalware fight, obviously, is a CR half. That's not supposed to be anything difficult whatsoever. However, the players are supposed to have the foresight to not kill it, and instead try to, like, subdue it or trap it or something, which I do think players would hopefully do once they put 2 and 2 together, which should be very quickly. And then they can perform this ritual with the elder of the halfling family as like a spellcaster, like an old witch lady. And she can do this ritual, but then he just takes off. Basically, it's just written as a cutscene where he just escapes. So I'm not sure what the designers were going for here, because it feels like this is an unsatisfying side quest no matter what happens. If the players kill this Jackalware, it reverts back to their friend Wolf, and then they're like, oh, well, whoops. And it even says the Harpers lose 150 XP, which I don't know what that means. It takes them 3 additional days. Does that mean the PCs lose XP? No. I would be crucified by my players. You don't take away experience. It's terrible. Or they do this ritual and the wolf creature escapes. I don't know if this creature is supposed to come back in a later adventure in the series or what, but he literally just takes off, and that's the last we see of it. And none of this has anything to do with the actual plot in the town that we're getting to. This is all just a big side event that happens en route, and because it doesn't really have a good ending to it, I just did not like this at all. I would almost rather just be like, look, here's a table of random encounters, roll that, and let's get going, you know? And it's a lot of real estate in this adventure is taken up with this ultimately unsatisfying part one. That's, what is that, 5-6 pages? Like, not great. Let's just move on. Part two, when they actually arrive in town, and again, I really, really think the Dramatis Personae is a fantastic feature to have in any adventure, but in this one particularly is one of the best I have ever seen. If I can praise anything from this adventure, it is that the description of the NPCs are so well done, and it's not that the actual like dialogue is written out, but it's just they're just given really fun quirks. Like Mia, the pub owner, is fond of animals and has several ferrets as pets. Tends to be discursive and frequently misuses words. Not an effort to sound smart. She's just a bit spacey. Duran, the priest, designs his own tattoos and is a bit of an artist. He's got his artwork everywhere. Faerun, the miner, or excuse me, a shovel merchant, bald third-generation miner. He just sings to himself, but it's like a classical. It sounds like he's a professional singing voice. It just happens to be he's just got a beautiful singing voice. Like that kind of. That's just really good, flavorful stuff that really makes it exciting as a DM for me to actually run NPCs in this town, which would otherwise just be people knocking on the doors and talking to people. And again, we're given a battle map here, which this is another just very generic town map that, frankly, you don't need. You know, as much as I like having battle maps, I don't ever require them for a town. I would have rather had like artwork of any of these characters instead just to pop up, which would have been nice to have. But I do really like I mean, you could see, look at that, Duran gets 3 giant paragraphs, which is fantastic. It's just really good story moments. None of them are, you know, particularly necessary to have. There's only one piece of, you know, it's not like they get a bunch of side quests here. There's only one main quest that we're still pursuing, and that is to go to figure out the source of the problem is this mysterious building out in the woods where the source of the insect invasion might be coming from. There's one minor encounter that can occur whenever they leave the tavern. There's a pair of brothers that can accost the players, which is meant to be more of a role-playing scenario because they are literally use the commoner stat block, so players are not meant to. And this is another thing that makes it very railroady and linear and specific, is that the players are meant to be exceedingly goody two-shoes. They're basically cops. I don't know exactly my Harper lore. I've pictured them as kind of like the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. of Faerun, maybe. But they're literally supposed to, like, they're not, like, literally the law. In fact, I think they're more like the Batmans of the world rather than the police officers. But they're not supposed to kill people, I guess. Or at least this one just says, like, they really shouldn't be using, like, violence or anything. Like, they really should be a goody two-shoes party, which is a big caveat. And that makes sense if this is part of a series where you started this adventure saying, okay, you guys are part of the Harpers, and this is your alignment and all that. But if you try to drop this in there with this adventure, and your players are just, like, robbing and stealing from people, as, you know, player characters can often do, the renegade part of Mass Effect, you can still be a good guy, but kind of skirt the rules a little bit, then you're going to run into some problems here, and including killing these literal commoner brother. Not even given, like, thief stat blocks, just commoners. There's oddly a random person they can hire named Mirabelle Laughingsteel, who's got some cool descriptions and sounds like a badass for 100 gold. There's a lot of money for that low level. She can guide the players to where they need to go, but she just leaves them when they get there, so I'm not sure what the point of having her there is. And part 3 is the actual dungeon, which is just a shed in the woods. And by the way, these are given as separate player maps. This is not just the embedded map you get. You do get a full grid map, which is nice for all of these. They get to the shed, and there's stairs leading down, and then there's your dungeon. This one feels like a really generic dungeon. Again, it's, ruined dungeon. It is designed as a generic dungeon, that this template, this layer was pasted over it, and as good as I liked, for example, the last DM's Guild review I did with Cult of the Glutton, where it really felt like a themed dungeon, that everything fit together, everything flowed together. The creatures that were there felt like they were local to that place and that dungeon and why they would coexist together and all that. This one really has that unfortunate quality of just shit was just thrown in there for whatever reason. Like, there is no reason why a nest full of cockatrices, a nested family of cockatrice. God, I still can't. The stone rooster things are just in one of these rooms, and then there's like a human or an elf wizard is the villain, just kind of chilling in a room like down the hall. Like, why would you have those around? There's a gray ooze like lurking in one of these rooms. Like, there's no reason why these things should be that close proximity to each other or anything of that nature. It's just very. It feels very much like you just roll the dice and then there's the creature. The one cool bit is there is a suits of armor that the players will that the boss can trigger if she knows that the players are here. The animated armor, which is a good CR1, that seems like a good enemy to have. Really difficulty wise, for level 3, often with DM's Guild stuff, designers tend to make them on the challenging side, I've noticed. Really pushing the limits of what a party can do, and balancing for D&D is excessively difficult. Like, it's because every part, it's like making a PC game. Like, every PC is different. And then every PC is different for D&D. Like, every party makeup is different. Some parties might not even be combat optimized, and some are going to be heavily min-maxed and all that. Have they rested, have they not, and all that kind of stuff. This one feels like the opposite. This one actually feels like it's really on the easy end, which isn't necessarily a huge complaint, except when it comes to the final boss. But it does use pretty low level and low challenge creatures, considering this is a full party of 3rd level PCs. These are all CR half, and then the CR1 animated armor. The final boss, and then there is a nice NPC in one of these rooms, which, again, this is the one thing the adventure does really, really well, is write NPCs to make them interesting. And this one has one of those. I'm trying to find. Okay, room 11. Handyman, butler, cook, and personal assistant to basically the main villain. And he's not really an evil dude. He's a really old man. He's like in his 70s, and the players or the DM could have fun role playing him and kind of telling about it. But unfortunately, as much as I like that, the actual final boss weirdly is not given a good enough treatment in my mind. Like, she does have a bit of a backstory, but I don't know why this elf wizard decided to hole up in this particular dungeon and unleash insects on the nearby town. Like, none of that. I don't know what her motivation. What is my motivation? There's not enough there for me to care as either a DM or a player. And, like, why, if her whole thing is insects, why is the dungeon not, like, insect-themed? Why aren't there just insects everywhere? And that's the whole theme of the dungeon. There's maybe a giant insect in one of these rooms that was a failed experiment, and then there's, like, swarms of insects coming out of the walls. Like, why is that not a theme of the dungeon, if that's the whole thing that she does? I don't get it. That could have been really cool. That could have been a cool thing. And she's got this neat staff of swarming insects, which I do like, enemies that have weapons that you can then take for your own as a player. I think that's always a neat concept. Have the foes actually wielding those weapons, which is neat. And she does. She's got this thing that she can cast giant insect or insect plague. She can use insect cloud. She's got up to 5th level spell slots. She's a CR5 wizard. The problem is she's just one damn wizard with 42 hit points and 13 armor class. Any party is going to friggin' decimate this poor person. And I know this from experience. Like, you can have a relatively powerful creature, but if there's just one of them against the party, that creature is going to get off maybe like 2 rounds before the party's just going to any party is going to have so many shutdowns and lockdowns, and just the action economy alone, like they're going to go 4 times to her 1. Like, you're done. Like, you're not going to get anything off, even if you get a surprise round, even if she somehow manages to hold the animated armors in check and add them to the fight later. Like, I would at the very minimum have to add, a pair of giant, scorpions with her or something to help her out and make that fight a little more interesting. Instead, she is designed to crawl into an apparatus of the crab, which it links to D&D Beyond for more information. That's, don't, if you're going to use something, you need to put it in here. Which I take it as that is the same as the apparatus of the Koalish or whatever. It's the big, like, kind of, it's just like a robot mech thing that you can climb inside, like a land submarine. But it's unfinished, and she just climbs in there. Let me see. Okay. She's aware of them. She meet them in her bedroom. She's been prepared to fight them off. She encounters the players in this room. She starts to lose the fight. She will attempt to escape into the apparatus of the crab. After 10 hours, she will start to run out of air. So she will go to... So she would literally hide herself in there. She can open the windows and just kind of wave at the players, and I guess the players can't get to her because she can seal it up. But she literally seals it up, and she'll just sleep, and then she'll run out of air and die peacefully in her sleep. What? That's the stupidest... How is that an ending to a boss fight? And the one DM note mentions, like, well, they could set fire to the bottom of it and then kind of cook her in an oven. That would make her come out and retreat. Like, I guess. So that could be... If the idea here is the players are supposed to think outside the box once she escapes into that thing. But I don't think, frankly, no party worth their salt would let it get that far. I think they would be able to take her out, knock her unconscious, whatever they need to do before she ever gets to that point. But I don't know. It's a little bit of an extra thing, but it's just not enough to make this interesting. The epilogue is just, hopefully they didn't kill Wolf, and but he still escapes, so there's not really an ending there. And then hopefully they arrested Mesika, is the elf wizard's name, and then they got her staff of swarming insects, which that part, again, you need to make that more of a thing, because I think the Harpers are all about making sure that powerful magic artifacts don't fall into the wrong hands. The fact that she's got the staff of swarming insects should be like the big ticket thing that they're after, that they should turn into the Harpers. Although again, any party is going to want that item for themselves because magic items are cool and fun. I don't know about this adventure. It's too railroady, but it also is not a good enough story to justify that railroad. The dungeon is excessively generic and just feels like really like things are just dropped in there. I don't know why the insect theme wasn't utilized better, because I think that could have been the cool angle that could have been used throughout the dungeon, and frankly, like in the town and in the encounters, there should have been like giant insects were attacking. Like, what is with that entire part one that has nothing to do with the rest of the adventure? I don't get that at all. So maybe if you look at the full series, these things make sense in the wider picture. Maybe that wolf character comes back later and other things, but I'm just reviewing this one adventure in this series, and it's pretty disappointing from what I can tell. Let's go over my pros and cons for Heaven is a Place on Faerun. I do really like this cover art, by the way. This feels like it was definitely custom drawn for this character, or this adventure was based on this character, which might have been, I don't know which way around this occurred, but because it mentions the elf has a disfiguring side to her face, kind of like a Two-Face type acid scar or something, which is really neat. But again, that insect theme should have been used more. All right, pros and cons before I get distracted. Pro, there are lots of well-written, detailed notes on every NPC. As I mentioned, that is a big strength of this adventure. You can't really, hang your hat on that as it worth getting for that, but I do like seeing that, and I think that's something that a lot of DM's Guild stuff can do better with and do well on in general, and this goes really above and beyond. We don't need this much. You can have like a sentence or two. The fact that we get like a full paragraph for all of these NPC town members, as well as what they actually, kind of information they can give the player, especially this part 2, is fantastic. Although on the other hand, it's very odd that like part 2, which is basically just talking to townspeople, is the best part of this adventure. The other pro is that each of the 3 parts does include a battle map. I am very much on my maps. I'm on DM's Guild creators all the time about providing maps, so I have to call out whenever they do provide maps, even though these maps are basically just generic gridded battle maps that were found and kind of plugged in here. But we do have maps, so there is that. Cons. Part 1 is excessively railroady and ultimately unsatisfying. I'm just not sure what they were going for with Part 1. It's just a completely separate side quest. There's nothing to do with the main plot. Not that the main plot has much to do with the main plot itself. There's not much going on there. It feels super obvious. The concept of the fact that the obvious choice for the werewolf or the werejackal is the one that did it, and it's the ending for him is not satisfying or fun in any way, is just, and there's just so much information being devoted. So much of this adventure, like half the adventure, is devoted to that part 1. So that's really disappointing. Cons: the dungeon in part 3 feels too generic and lacks cohesion. As I mentioned, it just feels like it's kind of random creatures, like a gray ooze somewhere, a cockatrice family in one. It's just, there's nothing really going on that makes it feel like this is the actual lair of a elf wizard with a bunch of insect powers. And then my other con is that the final boss is too easy by herself. You can make a wizard be as powerful as you want, but they still don't have very many hit points, and they're not going to get more than probably a spell or 2 off against any kind of party. And she just lacks really proper motivation. I don't know why she's doing what she's doing. As good as her like background information is, I'm still not sure why she's holed up in this town just doing random acts of insectness. I didn't get any of that. Final verdict: Heaven is a place on Faerun is too linear and specific to be a drop-in adventure or framework, and too generic and simplistic to make for a satisfying, story-heavy adventure. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.